72 teams, 320 games, approximately 800 players. And that doesn't include practice, so you can double that because they practice. This is just the games. And then there's Summer League, there's also Super Sunday, and then there's playoffs. And I bring that to everybody's attention because our district has always been very, very good, as has the community, in working as partners with every facet of this community. So our buildings aren't just used during the day, they're used throughout the day and throughout the school year. And those are those groups right there, and you recognize most of them. So we determined through the comprehensive facilities assessment what those projects are and what they would cost. So the next thing the board had to do is sit down with the administration and come up with funding sources. And there are funding sources, some of which we qualify for and some that we don't. So the funding sources that we have used to fund that $160 million is ESIP. ESIP is an acronym for Energy Savings Improvement Plan, and then also Referendum. And Mr. Doring, our school business administrator, will come up to speak to those two funding sources and the differences.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. Move this back. It's meant for people with good posture, which is fairly not neat. Okay, in terms of the needs that we have and the different mechanisms for providing for those needs, as Mr. Healy mentioned, we looked at all different angles. ESIP, as he mentioned, stands for Energy Savings Improvement Plan. And what we tried to do was cover as much as we could through the ESIP, because an ESIP is a self-funding program whereby the capital improvement projects that you do are paid with bonds that are repaid with the energy savings from those improvements. So it is self-funding with the savings. So we tried to carve out as much as we could in terms of ESIP projects. So we were able to capture $17.8 million, but then of course, after you cover those types of projects, in terms of what's left to be done, that's where referendum comes into play. Now, what is a referendum? Well, a referendum funds significant capital projects, including renovations, repairs, upgrades, or new construction. They require a public vote for approval for the issuance of bonds to pay for the work to be done. Now, our referendum addresses priority repairs district-wide and targets areas in our existing facilities and locations that are in serious disrepair, that are inefficient, or are downright broken. All of which is costing us more to try to keep up with it, not to mention the ongoing liability concerns and downtime and disruption from continuous breakdowns. An important point on this slide, I think, is the final bullet point, which clarifies that funds must be used as delineated in the bond proposal, meaning that we can't just all of a sudden decide, oh, we're going to take this money and construct a fourth high school, just by way of example. The funds must be used as delineated in the bond proposal. Now, in terms of the projected taxpayer impact, when we look at the financial impact at this phase, it's a little more straightforward than even when we were going around doing our 19 location tour for the first phase of the referendum. It's a little more straightforward now because the project is defined, the scope is defined, the state has reviewed the projects, has determined what's eligible and what is not, and has already provided us with what the financial support would be from them. Now, Bonds issued through referendum are paid through the debt service fund, which is a component of the school tax on your tax bill. And that is outside the 2% tax levy cap. Now, state debt service aid is available for up to 40% of eligible cost, which reduces that debt service fund obligation. When we submitted our projects to the Department of Education, 95% of those costs were eligible for funding, which means that in aggregate, 37.8% of the total proposed referendum would be covered by the state of New Jersey. The state then prorates their aid at 85%. I don't know the basis for 85%. The good thing is that's not a number that's changed in at least the last 8 years. So it's not that it's dropping down year by year. It's been at 85%. What this means is that for the total referendum amount of $147,148,269, the state will cover $47,281,593, leaving $99,866,676 to be covered locally on a net basis. Of course, the concern you always have when you are getting approval for state funding is that we have been approved for that funding now. We do not know what would happen if something was submitted 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. So at this point, the state has already approved funding that $47.2 million, and that really is significant. And when you look at how much, in terms of capital needs, when you look at how much is being covered for us, number one, the ESIP at $17.8 million, which is a self-funding mechanism. The state would be covering $47.2 million. So a lot of our capital needs can be addressed in that way, and with that level of support, which is significant. And as I said, you don't know if you submit this 6 months from now, if you will get approved for anything. That will depend on what the state is doing at that time. Now, another important thing to note is that in 2025-26, the debt service tax levy decreases by $4.7 million annually as bonds that we have now are paid off and are retired. So that offsets a significant portion of the anticipated new bond costs from the proposed referendum. Actually, that would offset approximately 2/3 of that anticipated new bond cost. Now, when we're looking at the projected impact, we have up here the average assessments in the 4 towns in the regional district and what the impact would be on a monthly basis and an annual basis. This is on our website. It is a live tax calculator that we have, whereby you can go to the website. Under the Rebuilding Our Schools section, it is now basically front center, where you would click on that. There's a drop-down menu. You pick your town. In the next box, you put your own individual assessment and hit submit, and it will tell you what this referendum would mean to you in terms of cost on an individual basis. Okay? Now, one of the important points is that this is the projected maximum impact. It's based on one bond issue for the $147 million, offset, of course, by the state's portion in the form of debt service aid. But it's based on one bond issue, issued for 20 years at 3.85%. All of these scenarios were cast with our financial advisor. It is possible that the inevitable cost may be less if we are able to issue the bonds in multiple tranches over a few year period, depending on the actual construction schedules. But we show the maximum projected impact. Okay? Now, one of the important things that we needed to do, not just here for this type of presentation, but also on our website, is a $147 million referendum is obviously a sizable referendum, and we have a significant number of locations. So what we will have online, right now you have handouts that have schools for the South region. We have online already the North and the East regions. But what we are inevitably going to have, and this is this week, we will have on the website the breakdown by school, or the list, which breaks down the $147 million by location. And then those will be hot links, whereby if you want to see the detail for that particular school, you hit that link and it'll bring up the level of detail that you have each. Okay. So we're going to the live tax calculator. Who's going to be our example? Volunteers? Jenny? Okay, Mrs. Ryan will do this. We know what town you live in. You want to type it in. Okay, Towns River, right? 386,000. You hit submit, and that gives you your monthly impact, and it gives you your annual impact. Now, I think that's a very useful tool to see how it impacts you individually. Again, based on the single bond issue. Very easy to use. Yes. Do we already have them as hot links? Okay. Well, this is great. I said this week, and just like that, it's already ready. But this is where you're going to be able to click on any location. And keep in mind, we have the breakdown by location for the $147 million. You can click on that location and see the work to be done at that location. Let's pull up an example. It's going to be similar to what you have in your handout, where you can look at Walnut Street Elementary and go through and see how much is for paving, how much is for envelope, how much is for security, electrical. So it's going to be able to provide you with that detail for every single location. Okay, so we wanted to make sure that everybody could follow every dollar in this referendum. Okay? Now, one of the last points I'll make before I turn it back over to Mr. Healy is that the needs at each of our buildings, and I know Mr. Healy mentioned this before, but it is worth repeating, really vary based on a number of conditions, including the size, the age, and the condition of the school. What's also factoring into that is that some schools have had renovations in the last decade, whether it be a boiler replacement or something else, so that certain schools may not have a particular need that other schools do. But here you'll see it's broken down by the grade bands, showing how much you have in the referendum for elementary, intermediate, high school, and then other facilities, which includes the Early Learning Center at 1144. So that is your 147 million broken down by the grade bands, but then you will also have the by location breakdown, and then this is where you're going to be able to hot link in and see the detail even behind that. We want to unpack that to that level so that you can see the detail. Okay? So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Healy to discuss further specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Doring. Just want to recognize and thank them for the support. We have two Beechwood councilmen here, Councilman Feeney and Councilman LaCrosse, and we thank you for being out here in support of this presentation. And also, board member Jennifer Howe is here somewhere. I think I saw her. So welcome, Mrs. Howe. There she is. Okay. So what is addressed in the referendum? What you're seeing here are really general categories. This was presented at our original 19 building meetings. We had 19 individual school meetings that we presented building by building with the information we had at the time. And then since then, we've refined that list to all 23 locations based on the feedback we received, both from the meetings but also in the email responses from the people that attended those meetings. And then we further refined that list to include items that we realized that the community felt that they were a priority and they may not have been listed in the overall assessment. So they are included in here as well. And so we wanted to make this very interactive and really listen to what our community had presented, and that included a number of teachers who attended these meetings at their respective schools. So the rest of this presentation is going to get down to specifics, and that will be what projects will be addressed building by building. In other words, what your children are going to get. If your children are at Washington Street School currently, you'll know what they're going to get through Washington Street School, Intermediate South, if they attend there, and then High School South. And if your children are at High School South and it's your last child, but then you have other children, so you'll see exactly what that entails. And so this is the South region meeting. We also want to know what the calculated costs are that we're going to provide to you, and also what the tax impact will be to you. And Mr. Doring showed you examples with the tax calculator. And I know, Mr. Doring presented to you the self-funding cost of $17.8 million that will not impact the taxpayers, and then also the $47 million that we're receiving from the state of New Jersey. That's $65 million of work that will not have a tax impact. That's pretty significant, and it was a lot of work on the part of Mr. Wagner, Mr. Doring, our engineers from Mazer, who are here this evening and will be prepared to answer questions. But $65 million is a lot of money. It's going to do a lot of work, and it's something that through the work of a number of people will not be on the backs of our taxpayers. That just doesn't happen by accident. And so a lot of folks in this room that are entrusted by you to do the right thing have done the right thing, and it's important to emphasize that. So site-specific plans. The first is the Early Learning Center, which we include in all the slides because it impacts all of our areas. Our students attend there. I listed a little bit of history so you understand the age. The age of the building when it opened, the amount of classrooms, the square feet. Last night at a meeting, a gentleman had asked, could you list the square footage on those buildings? So today, Mr. Wagner put together all the square footage. We added it here, including, not on this one, but the acreage. So you'll not only know the square footage of the building, but also the size of the property and the programs that we provide there. We have 130 special needs pre-K students. Those are our 3- and 4-year-old preschool disabled kids. And then 102 daycare children are housed in that building. And those are the projects in the Early Learning Center. What I'll do is I'll highlight one or two that are unique, but overall you can see with the different dollar amounts. It's important to note that every building in the district, every school building, and the Early Learning Center and the daycare is one of them, will have combined, district-wide, $5 million out of this referendum are going into security upgrades that include cameras, throughout, keyless entry, and then also security vestibules. So security vestibules now, you buzz in on the outside, they ask you for your license, and then you walk in the building. Well, once this is completed, the security vestibules, unless you have business in the building, all the business is done in that security vestibule. If you need to drop off your child's band instrument or their lunch or lunch money, all that business can be conducted in there unless you have a meeting for a parent-teacher conference or an IEP meeting, but no outsiders will be in that building unless they have business to be in that building. Further adding to the security that we already have in place with an armed officer in every building, as you should know too. So we take that very seriously. Beechwood Elementary School. It's 31 years old. It lists the square footage. It's on a 13, almost 14 acre piece of property. The staff, and it has our future ready, certified, and responsive classrooms. What work is being done at Beechwood? You can see that's the list. Some of them are, there's greater need. For example, roofs, we have security upgrades. Here we have a gym AC electrical connection. So some things are unique to certain buildings. For example, exterior door replacements.
How many classrooms in this room for this?
We have 36 classrooms. And by the way, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So write them down so you're ready. And we have everybody here to answer those for you. So you'll see in every building in this district, we'll have air conditioning. So those buildings that already have air conditioning, those that may have no air conditioning, and those that have partial air conditioning, they'll be addressed. And our air conditioning systems that exist are failing, and we are replacing them as we speak in some cases, not now with the air conditioning. But here's our belief. We sit in an air-conditioned office. We visit a lot of buildings. But our teachers, their office is their classroom. I don't want to work in a 90-degree classroom. And I don't expect our teachers, our administrators, or our students to just expect them to go through a day and really have effective learning and teaching going on in a 90-degree classroom 2 months out of the year. I just think that's just not fair. So we have an opportunity to do this and bring our buildings up to where they should have been a long time ago. Pine Beach Elementary School, it's 65 years old. 435 students, 32 classrooms. It's a 26, almost 26 acre lot and 58,000 square feet. And on some of these we list the grant awards. So the reason we list that is because to date we've received in alternate revenue sources through the work of individuals in this district to date over $3 million in alternate revenue sources, either through grants or corporate sponsorship. That $3 million has gone directly back into our buildings and our programs and services, and has been integral to be able to protect and preserve a lot of those programs that we may have lost with the drastic state aid cuts. So we're heavily relying on a lot of the alternate revenue sources that we've generated and that we continue to generate. For example, the $637,000 naming rights to the RWJ Barnabas Arena, several grants from the Grinnan Foundation, Adil Habnani from the Habnani Foundation awarded us $255,000 for 1 year. That is reinvested back into kids, nothing else. And that has really helped offset some of the costs with some of the cuts we've had. In this case, we had a $100,000 grant, art grant, that was a Department of Education award. And these are the projects here for Pine Beach. Now you'll see here, there's something that may not be on other facilities, and you'll see a facade replacement. Remember what I said about earlier, the envelope? When you have cracking brick and water infiltration and freezing and further cracking, we're getting water inside our buildings. So these are facade restoration work, which includes building repointing, fascia and soffits, we have roofing. Also, all 12 of our elementary schools, all 12 of them, in various stages of need, will have their playgrounds either fully upgraded, replaced, or partially upgraded. Some have since been upgraded through the generosity of our PTOs, but there are a lot of others that haven't. And we don't believe in having disparate treatment just because of the side of town you live on. We believe in equity, and that's something that's being addressed here. And not only is it being addressed, but in certain areas that house certain populations, for example, our Silver Bay Elementary School that houses our most disabled and fragile children, those playgrounds have already been designed to accommodate those most needed physically impaired children that are maybe in wheelchairs. So there's some interactive play equipment, and so a lot of attention to detail in what we've done here. South Toms River Elementary School, 37 years old. You can read what's up there. A lot of work has taken place on that building in the last few years. That was needed and really emerging in many cases. And we're pleased that that has taken place. And you can see here what those projects are that are listed. And you see ADA, which is addressing some of the handicap accessible issues, whether they're grandfathered in or not. We want to make sure that just because we don't have to have a ramp access because we're grandfathered, doesn't mean we won't put one in, and that was addressed through the engineering assessments that we've done. Walnut Street Elementary School, and you look at our sites, they're pretty large, 23 acres, a lot of that is playground area. We also have one of the turf fields that were, there was a shared cost between the township and the school district, and that field is used 7 nights a week and all summer. So that's one of the turf fields, one of the newer turf fields. And then those are the projects for Walnut Elementary School. Very similar, but varying degrees of work and costs. And then Washington Street. It's a 58-year-old building. And here's the work that's going to be done on Washington Street School. Most of them are similar. You'll see on here, and that was on every one of them, every one of our schools, some already exist, and they're not a significant cost, but they will have hydration stations. So I think most of you know we have water fountains that nobody uses. We don't drink water. Some of them have been tested positive for lead with our lead testing, and we've since remediated that. But with the hydration stations, those are filtered stations that take out, I forget, 99.9% of all impurities, and now our students can walk around with water bottles and not have to bring water to school or go thirsty. So every one of our buildings, depending on the size, there'll be 1, 2, or 3 hydration stations throughout all of our schools. And that's not a significant cost. It's actually far cheaper than replacing all the lead and the copper and some of our other existing fixtures. And then Intermediate South, that's really our newest building. It doesn't need a lot of work, but it needs some work. And one of the things that's being done, and it's actually in the ESIP, and you may wonder what a self-funding project or a cost-neutral project. Well, we have $17.8 million in those projects through ESIP, as Mr. Doring had mentioned. For example, every building in this district will replace these fluorescent lights and these incandescent lights with high-efficiency LED lighting. There'll be a 75% energy savings once we do that. That will help fund most of that $17.8 million. And that's what self-funding is. Not only will it help fund the utility costs, but it will or reduce rather and fund. But also the LEDs have a life expectancy of 25, 30 years, so we're not going to be replacing bulbs and ballasts and the labor and the material associated with that. That is a huge cost savings initiative, and that is being covered in the $17.8 million, including the boilers throughout the district, and at no cost to the taxpayers. And these are the projects. And you can see that as big as that school is, it really doesn't require all that much because it is our newest. And the ESIP is separate from these numbers. That's part of the $17.8 million that's not in there, that's being done separate. This is just for the referendum. And then there's High School South, and that's our oldest building. And it's a wonderful building, those of you that have been here. And it's actually preserved fairly well, considering how old it is. And those are the projects. And you can see the amount of work compared to high school or intermediate south. It's more than double in terms of the work, and it's well needed. And we're excited about that. And we've already done work here that we've addressed. For example, the stadium was addressed, which was the original stadium from 1939. I think it needed to be replaced, and we did that since we've been here. Some of the air conditioning in this building gets awful hot. Those either from Mr. Fournier. It gets hot in here, doesn't it, Mr. Fournier? And so also in this building doesn't have an elevator. It's important to note. We have handicapped students or students that have a full schedule upstairs that may have gone skiing and broke their leg. In the past, we'd have to relocate them downstairs, and it compromised the education that they were getting. So the elevator, we looked at the feasibility of an elevator in this building. It just didn't work without getting into all the details. But we're putting in a chair lift that'll work in the back stairway. It's a platform that can hold a wheelchair. It'll provide the same function. So any student that's in a wheelchair and a cast, crutches, they will be able to access the second story through, at a much lower cost, but a commercial grade chairlift. And what that'll do is it'll allow us to eliminate any disruption because of somebody broke their ankle in soccer or football, and that happens. And it's been an inconvenience and a disruption. And I know Bob's over there, and he can attest to that, one of our guidance directors, where we have to adjust schedules. So that will no longer be the case. The John Bennett Athletic Center, which is the bubble, and that's also one of our, we rent a lot. In fact, the NJSIA spends a lot of money that goes into the enterprise fund to run a lot of their state track events, the indoor winter track events. But that building wasn't fully completed for one reason or another. If you've been there, the parking lot's dirt. When we plow it, which we need to plow it, it lifts up dirt. We have to regrade it. It can't be lined or striped, so we pay extra security to usher cars into spaces. The curb is about 10 inches high right now because there's no asphalt, so it's a tripping hazard. And it's only an 8-month facility because once spring rolls around and summer rolls around, it's 120 degrees in there. So one of the other things that we're doing is doing the parking lots, putting air conditioning in there. It'll be a 12-month facility. I was in communication with the Township's Park and Rec, who utilizes in a lot of those buildings. And we may be able to put more of the summer programs in there, freeing up a lot of our other buildings, especially when this referendum takes place, because summer is an important time to accelerate work, and we can free up the parking lots and the buildings and put a lot of our students for the summer activities in the bubble with air conditioning, and that's something we're hoping to be able to do. And that does generate a lot of revenue for that facility, and we anticipate with air conditioning, the parking spaces, and some of the other things that we will do, will increase that revenue for rentals significantly over the summer and some other times. And then our maintenance facilities complex, I say this at every meeting, you know, the shoemakers' children go barefoot. That's the department that's responsible for fixing all our buildings. Their buildings need the most work. It was used as our vehicle maintenance repair facility, and there's some work being done there. It's a very active operation when you consider the size of this district and what the responsibilities are, and they just can't keep up with it anymore because of the deterioration of our buildings. And then our transportation complex, that doesn't require a whole lot, but it is quite a complex, and it is the largest board-owned bus fleet in the state of New Jersey. It operates at twice the efficiency level that the state requires us to operate. We have 168 buses a day, 459 routes a day, a 4-tiered system. You all know what the tiers are. And we transport 13,000 students a day with little or no incident. Maybe a bump or a fender, you know, somebody, but it's quite an operation, and that facility will get some needed attention. And then central registration, which is our 54 Washington Street site. That's actually a town-owned property that we lease for $1. It's been that way for many, many years. We're responsible for the maintenance and repair. It houses our partnership healthcare center, which saves this district a ton of money in healthcare costs when you compare our premium increases to that of the state health plan. But it also houses our central registration, where we do all our registrations in the district, where we screen people, make sure that the students actually live in town, make sure that all their health information is there, and we have our residency officer and then also our head nurse. And then these are the combined projects and the costs at all of those outbuildings separate from the schools. And combined, when you look at 1144, Central Reg, et cetera, for those sites, it's $5.2 million. So really a small part of the overall referendum. Most of the attention's on our schools, based on the need. And then here's the timeline. I mean, you know, and it's important that people know the timeline because, they just decided they're going to do this. This was very well thought out, very well planned. Hundreds and hundreds of hours, engineers, architects, the board, our buildings and grounds department, and we've done a lot. And so, as I said, it began in 2013. The nice thing is that this board and prior boards responded to what the community survey yielded. And much of those items on that community surveys not only have been addressed, but they've all been addressed, but then we've addressed even more. I think the community should be very pleased and proud that this board responded to a survey that was issued that addressed a number of things that we've since addressed. And then here's the timeline, you can see it. And then we have a referendum vote scheduled for January 22nd. We're conducting the last of our public meetings. And if all goes as planned, the referendum work will begin in the fall of 2019. And in the spring, this spring and this summer, that's when the bidding will take place on all those projects that have already been determined. And so people have asked, why now, why now? You can read, that's why now. This is, it's not made up. It's exactly why now. We're experiencing right now things that are on the referendum that have a dollar amount associated with it that have failed, have cost us twice as much money to replace and repair because we're at the mercy of an emergency repair rather than a competitive bid process. So as things fail, they cost twice as much money because, for example, if the boilers in this building through the ESIP have all been replaced. The boilers in a 67-year-old building finally were replaced. And they were monsters, but they were replaced at no cost to anybody in this room through the ESIP. And if you go in that room, it's a work of art. It's amazing. But if that boiler failed, and that was emergent, by the way, and we got it in just in time, but if that boiler failed, it would have cost Mr. Nardini, what, a couple of million? It would have been twice. And that's what happens. So, these are urgent issues here. So, more information, this is it. It's a ton of information. We keep adding to it. We'll add to it now until the referendum vote, and we will continue to update it throughout the process. So we'll have before and after pictures, so you just go on there and how's the parking lot doing over at Walnut Street, or did we get the lighting in this building? You'll see, just go there, you'll see the pictures on your children's building or the facility. We want to make sure that you're well informed, you have no questions, and you know that we're providing you with accurate and timely information. And that was a very important goal of this board, that nobody had any questions or was guessing. And if there are any questions, as I said, we have an email address. We had a few of them today, they were responded. Just click on there, send your question, and we'll respond it. And if it's not on the FAQ page, we'll add it. Okay, so this, that's what we're doing. And then before we go to the question and answers, I want to bring up our board president, Mr. Nardini, and also our board vice president, Mr. Corby, who played a big role in this as the board president last year as we were developing this. And I know you're going to say this, Mr. Nardini, but Mr. Nardini really adds a whole nother level to the support we have. He's a board member, he's the chair of the Buildings and Grounds Committee, and he's a 45-year contractor. Nobody can pull the wool over his eyes, I can tell you. So when it comes to work, he's going to be the eyes and ears among other folks here. So Mr. Nardini is that a good plug for you, Mr. Nardini? Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Joe Nardini. I am in business over 45 years. In fact, 2 months will be 46 years. All I know is construction, and I love it. Over this period of time, I have seen projects done that were completed very nice, that were done in a neat and workmanlike manner, as they should, and some left a lot to be desired. It is our obligation as a board and administration to make sure that this work is done in a neat and workmanlike manner. What we decided to do is have this work done with a PLA. A PLA is an acronym for Project Labor Agreement. And what that does, it enables us to hire trades, negotiate with them how they're gonna work in our facilities, what times, what areas, and so on. So it's not like we're gonna hire somebody, they're gonna come in and say, hey, get everybody out of the classroom, we have to work there. It doesn't work that way. They're working around our schedule. We have to look for the welfare of our children first. It also allows us to have accredited mechanics working in our buildings. We're not gonna hire somebody who's hanging out in a phone booth and say you're an electrician for a day, you're a carpenter for a day. You will have to have completed an accredited apprenticeship program before you come in our buildings. And another aspect of that is 88% of the labor that's going to work in our buildings is going to be from our backyard. Toms River, Bricktown, Bayville, Ocean County. We're not going to be hiring trades from other states who's going to come in here with an army of people, blitz it, walk out the door, and we're left holding a bag. 88% of the people with the talent will be right here. Another aspect of that is they're going to cash their paychecks here, which will infuse a lot of money in our local economy. You know, this is something that has to be done. One way or the other, this has to be done. It's not fair to our children and our great teachers to put up with this. Like Mr. Healy said, they're in classrooms at 95 degrees. That's not fair. We sit in an air-conditioned office, or I don't, but most people do, you know? And it's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair to have mold on the walls. We have to do this. It's our obligation to do this for our children and our teachers. And that's that. I mean, that's what we should do. Thank you. Mr. Corby, I'm going to bring Mr. Corby up, and he's going to explain another aspect of this, why it's so important for us to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Nardini, and again, my name is Russ Corby. I served this year as the Vice President of the Board, last year as the President when much of this was being put together. But I think it's important to speak about our responsibility as a generation, if you will. In the 60s, 70s, the 80s, the population of Ocean County, and particularly Toms River in our area, exploded. And another generation was faced with the job, really, of constructing these buildings that we were talking about. And I believe at one portion there was 7 new schools built in 14 years because of the influx of people. You saw tonight the age of some of these buildings. We're not talking about brand new buildings. We're talking about taking care of what was given to us by another generation. And yes, I'm sure they had to step up the plate. They had to pay the taxes to do it, but it got done. So we really all here tonight have an obligation. And that obligation is about our posterity, what was given to us by other generations, and what we're going to leave to the next generation and beyond. I think it's pretty important to say that in this building, Toms River High School South, one of the first of 3 high schools, I think, in the whole county, if you go back to 2 centuries ago. This building has so much tradition and generations of students. I'm sure there's many here. And we have had the opportunity of having a great education, the opportunity of having great pride in our communities, and people come here, come to Toms River in this area because of the schools, because of the quality of education. That just didn't happen. It's our turn, if you will, stand up, take care of what was given to us, and pass it along to the next generation. And I'm sure most of you are probably anxious to ask some questions. I'm gonna turn this back over, but I just like to set the tone in terms of our responsibility.
Okay.
So,
So,
any questions?
so tonight, I think I'd like the engineers to be up here and then Mr. Durham, so we can field a number of questions. And then I can speak and I'll walk around with the mic. Those of you that are old enough to remember Phil Donahue, I'll be Phil Donahue. And I just want to recognize Councilman Mo Hill from Toms River. I just saw him. Hi, Mr. Hill, Dr. Hill, thank you for coming. So who wants to ask the first question? You're gonna make me start here and then walk.
And please state your name and the town you're in, please.
Krista Whitaker, South Toms River. I have a question. Obviously, I'm just looking at the south side, but there's lots of HVAC and electrical. Would it be beneficial for us to actually bring on our own employees that are licensed in those areas to sit here and manage the work instead of keep contracting out to the bigger companies? Maybe, you know, bring in a few of these apprentices and as well as the main electrician? Would that save us any money in any way, or is that looking like too much? And then
It wouldn't be feasible, Mr. Whitaker. There's a lot of big work that has to be done here. And even small contractors could not handle it. You know, you're dealing with big pipe, big wire, big installations. You have to have the manpower and the wherewithal to do this. It just can't be done with a field crew. There's a lot to it. There really is. But it's a good idea. And
Well, only, I know my husband's electric company is only 23 guys, and the size of the warehouses and buildings and stuff that they're working in on a daily basis on a time restraint that they're
that's-
managing. So that's why I'm
Yes,
asking.
but you also have to have all the equipment. You know, the scaffolding, the tuggers, the pullers, the benders.
Okay. And then just one other question. Obviously, the S2 and this combining is pretty scary as far as taxpayers go. But if we're looking at what you proposed as far as being taken away from the district, as far as busing or after-school activities or non-varsity sports, where is the guarantee for our bus depot to get the repairs or our turf and fields to get the repairs?
I can answer that. So you have to be sure to make a distinction between this and the loss in state aid. They're apples and oranges. So the things we mentioned about what possibly was on the table, those things are on the table. Nothing has happened yet, and let's hope it doesn't. But so there's a question, what happens, and I'm sure somebody's gonna ask it, what happens if this doesn't go through? The work has to be done. And then therefore, the work is gonna come out of the general budget. And if it comes out of the general budget, it's gonna cost more, it'll be done on an emergent basis. And if it comes out of the general fund, we have a 2% cap, we can't increase that. Other things will have to suffer in the district. So there's gotta be a distinction. This is apples and the budget's oranges. This is actually going to, this will actually protect somewhat the budget from catastrophic costs associated with the ongoing building repairs. And this is a 20-year funded bond. If you look at Toms River, the average homeowner will pay $11 a month for the average assessment. So it's important, and I'm glad you asked that. You have to make a distinction between this and then our general budget and then the tax, the state aid losses that we've had. So to kind of answer it again is if this fails, and I'm not, you know, if this fails, that money and that work has to be paid for from somewhere, and it has to come out of the general budget. And keep in mind, when we found out in the 11th hour that we were losing that state aid, we had to go back to our maintenance reserve and further drain it so that we didn't have to disrupt the entire school district with staffing, with schedules, staff cuts, everything else. So what we did is we took millions out of reserve accounts that we didn't even have really, especially in a district that is having failures of systems regularly. So we've been able to keep our head above water, but just got to make a distinction between the two.
I'm only asking
Yep.
because just in high school south, we're looking at almost 1.2 million, if I'm doing math correct, on sports fields and complexes.
So if for whatever reason, one or the other, is this I mean, we're gonna fix this now and you're gonna take away our sports in 3 years, we just wasted.
Mrs. Whitaker, nobody said we're gonna take away sports. Now, you misinterpreted. You're misinterpreting what was said. So, now, when the question was asked, what would the budget, how would the budget cuts affect things? It could affect everything. There was nothing specific and there was nothing final. So we're not taking away anything. When that time, if the time comes, and we're gonna do, believe me, everything in our power to avoid that. We're doing that right now as we speak. But turf fields, you brought up turf fields. Our 3 turf fields are approaching 14 years old. They were put in almost 14 years ago. When I mentioned earlier the amount of organization within the community, not only our teams that use our fields, Pop Warner, we use those fields for soccer, field hockey, JV, freshman, varsity, all those sports. We never have to rest those fields. We don't have to irrigate the fields. We don't have to fertilize. We don't have to sod. That's about $40,000 per year per field. So the turf replacements, which have to be done, unless we do eliminate, we just shut them down, which is going to impact the community and also the district, but we can't shut them down. The reason they need to be replaced is what's called a Gmax testing. The Gmax measures the bounce in the field, and so far our Gmax has been rated safe. Eventually that's going to go away, and then we're not going to be able to use our fields anymore. And so when we can't use our fields, it's going to impact health and phys ed, it's going to impact all varsity sports, sub-varsity sports, freshman sports, and then all community organizations. So it's a good question about turf fields.
Excuse me, Mr. Healy, can I just
Yes.
interject?
Yeah.
And remind everybody, or inform everybody, that the turf field replacement was deemed an eligible cost by the state of New Jersey. So they're funding 40% of the replacement of those turf fields at all 3 schools.
Excellent.
Well, 30, right. The state's 40% equals 32, all said and done, yes.
Hi, my name is Bob Mayer. I'm from Beechwood. Can you give us a picture of the total indebtedness and bond servicing that we have in the district? Was that $4.7 million that ends in 2026? Is that the entire debt servicing that we're doing now?
It's not the entire amount. We're at about $6.5 million right now, so it's the majority of it. In terms of total debt, I wish I had the audit with me, but it's somewhere in the $45 million range.
And through what year would the latest of that $45 million end?
I believe, actually I have the schedule. I think it's around 2030, the last small piece. 4.7 million comes off in 2025-26, then there's a small portion
Okay.
that goes for a few more years. I'll find out. the
Thank you.
specifics.
Ready?
John Federico, Beechwood. I intend to vote yes for this. I don't have any kids in the system, but I understand the importance of what needs to happen here. My concern is, I'm looking at the budget here for 18 and 19, and maintenance and upkeep is buried with operations and security. I mean, we're gonna get all this new stuff, and there's no plan. It just seems to me we're just gonna go about it the same way when it comes to maintenance. And I'm talking preventative maintenance, which leads to less corrective maintenance. So how are we gonna pay if we can't keep, if we're not upkeeping what we have, when we get all new stuff, this stuff, how are we gonna keep this up so that when this bond is finally paid off, we don't have to do it again?
Want me to address that, Mr.
Sure,
Healy?
and Mr. Wagner certainly can, and we've already done a number of things to address. Go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
Well, first of all, to answer the prior question, the bonds would be paid off, the final ones, in 2028. And with regards to the maintenance budget, I'm not sure which document you're looking at, but that's one level of detail. But then we, of course, have the DOE budget, which breaks it down even further. Our total maintenance budget within that total you're looking at, which includes custodial, maintenance, and security, is around $3.4 million. Of that $3.4 million, around $1 million of that is for supplies and services, and the rest funds the salaries of the existing maintenance staff that we have. So the plan would be, because right now that $1 million that we have for supplies and services is used almost day one of the year, taking care of the 100 things around here that are breaking down. So our intention would be to maintain that budget, not turn around and say, okay, if this passes, get rid of the maintenance budget, we should be good for a while. But to repurpose the existing budget to be paying for the service contracts and the maintenance contracts to preserve what's being invested. Okay?
Also, it's an excellent question. Also, in terms of the service and the maintenance contracts that will be in place, this board and this administration have put a number of efficiency systems in place that didn't exist a few years ago in the Buildings and Grounds Department to address the very thing that you mentioned. You're absolutely right. There has to be preventative maintenance. There has to be timely repairs. We've reallocated a position, not added a position to the Buildings and Grounds Department to help Mr. Wagner manage what is a very large operation, and that's Mr. Peter Tomko. And he's a boots on the ground, infield person, quality control, following up on all the work orders. And we have a school duty work order system where the work orders are monitored, they're entered, they're monitored. So there's things that we haven't put in place, but you're absolutely right. When these things are put in place, they have to be maintained. One of the things that's going to allow us to do, which we can't do right now because we just can't stay ahead of things, is once these items are repaired and replaced, that it's going to allow our maintenance department, rather than doing emergency fixes, to do preventative maintenance. And that's something that is really a challenge to do right now. We're just responding to emergencies. So, but that's an excellent question. We've definitely thought that one out. Here you go, Mr. Galante.
Dennis Galante, John River. I appreciate your efforts. I appreciate your presentation. I wish I had a copy of that. It would give me another 3 pages of questions. So if I can, I did read the facility assessment report, and I've got a lot of items in there. Some that kind of, I think, are frivolous and maybe excessive. Tons of a bus garage, power washing, that cost $52,000. Replacement of water fountains, I think that was maybe answered with your hydration stations. Landscaping, grading costs. What exactly are needed for the upgrades of the kitchens that are not performing what they need to do now? That's another one of my questions. I have a few to get through here, so I don't know.
You want to have them answered as you go rather than us trying
Well,
to...
I had the questions and then I have the statement, so whichever way you propose.
Okay, do you want to rest it?
Yeah, I believe we're only upgrading one kitchen, which is.
Answer the grading and the reason for that.
Yeah. So when you read the FCA, you go through everything, and you go through these notes, one of the things you'll notice is there's a lot of items in the FCA that are not in this. A lot of things have already been handled by the school's building and grounds team. A lot of the landscaping stuff has already been handled. Some of the grading issues though are a little bit larger, specifically in the parking lots. There's ponding, that's creating icy situations. You know, there's potholes, there's broken curbs, so we're incorporating that into this to relook at the entire parking lot and fix those. A lot of the smaller items, if you go through the entire FCA report, there's a lot of stuff that was already addressed or stuff that we did when we went through. I mean, there were, I want to say, not fewer than 3 all-day meetings with our team, the administration, buildings and ground, going through every line item and that saying, should it be in the referendum or not be? And there was a lot of stuff that was taken out because the buildings and grounds team can handle it, or it's just not a priority to go into this. Again, it's a big number, but there was a lot of thought that went into what projects went in and what projects weren't.
All right, that's part of my priority 1, priority 2. But I also saw miscellaneous monies requested in each of the 18 schools, with some costs from $200,000 to $500,000 per school add-on options. What is an add-on option that's going to represent possibly up to dollars.
Well, again, going back to the FCA, those were things that weren't really priorities, aesthetic stuff, things that you could do if you wanted to. Anything that's in the actual referendum is delineated, so the only thing you will see in here is sort of just an add-on into the actual referendum is under each building. We do have a contingency cost fund, because anybody who's done construction knows you get into a building, you start tearing up walls, you start tearing up floors, you start digging up a parking lot, you're gonna run into stuff. So we have that, but some of those stuff, those add-ons were eliminated, they're not part of the referendum.
I saw the needs, and I saw the pictures on the website, I saw a picture of a shrub, I saw a picture of a broken curb, potholes, I saw a picture of a leaky window. And I guess you're gonna replace all the windows in all the schools?
We're needed, yes.
Where needed.
And not every window in every school, but where
needed. And they can replace it with high efficiency security glass.
What is the regular budgeted amount for the regular maintenance per year in budget? And why has a lot of these needs not been done in the past? What is our budgeted amount?
Well, actually,
For last year,
I just covered this, Mr. Galante, but our maintenance budget's $3.4 million.
3.4?
Yes, of which I mentioned that $1 million is for supplies and services, and the rest funds the maintenance staff. In terms of addressing the needs in this district, I think what's apparent, not only from a facilities condition assessment, but even from, I think, all of our own experience, including myself, because you know I live in town as well, there are way more in needs than we have in funding to address those needs. Back in 2009-10, when the state first took $10 million from this district, it was accounts like that got demolished. So you've had a period of time where you're trying to address your needs, not only repairs, but try to do some type of preventative maintenance where you can. Unfortunately, the needs are up here and the funding is here, and it's been that way. And the way the budget process has gone, and you're very much in tune with that, because we have regular dialogue every year for the budget. But the bottom line is those needs continue to go this way, and we can't budget more. If anything, we're looking at tightening down everywhere even more. So we put ourselves in a position, not by any fault of our own, but just by being in a situation with having state aid issues and having buildings that continue to age, of not being able to keep up with that. And the facilities condition assessment, I think, revealed what most of us can see if we walked around this building or any other school in the district.
But the regular maintenance, has that amount in the budget of every year for maintenance, has it been totally expended, totally spent? Has there been any surplus in those accounts that, let's say, haven't been transferred?
In terms of maintenance, there may have been some transfers within maintenance, but I think if you look, what you'll see is that each year, as we can squeeze available money from any other place, we're moving it into maintenance to try to address all of the items that come up each year that you just can't keep up with.
Well, I can't see why the potholes haven't been fixed, the curbs haven't been fixed, and the leaky window hasn't been fixed in the past. Why all of a sudden it's all accumulated to needing this amount now? So that said, I see very high costs of electrical and telecom. But what exactly do you plan on doing in all the schools that aren't functioning now? This seems to be working well. I walked this school on the way in, and for this to be the oldest school in this district, I see very few needs myself. But linoleum looks good. I do see one ceiling tile that needs to be replaced. And I just need to know what all this stuff is. What is actually priority one, priority two, and what is necessary?
Maybe we need one more meeting, because I know there's always a question, ask a question. Please, Dave, wrap it.
Well, I knew this was coming.
Well, I'll come back to you.
If I could just hit one point, because you mentioned the electrical upgrades. Oh, we're proposing to make sure there's air conditioning in every classroom, in every school. Right now, most of the buildings don't have any air conditioning, some have partial air conditioning. But the existing electrical systems for the buildings that have none or partial were designed to have none or partial air conditioning. So we've got to do the electrical upgrades in order to be able to provide the air conditioning, or we're not going to be able to do that. If you cut the electrical out, the air conditioning has to go because the building's electrical systems aren't designed to handle the loads that the air conditioning units are going to put on it.
My name is Paul Humphreys. I have a daughter in school still, and I'd love to pass this without a doubt because it would be great. You know, everybody would like a Cadillac. I don't drive a Cadillac. I drive a regular car. I think some of this stuff is astronomical. How many? It says there's 11 classrooms in the Learning Center, right? In the Early Learning Center. And there's 102 daycare kids and 130 pre-K. Now, how long does a pre-K student stay in that class? How many hours?
There's half day and full day programs. And just let me remind you, if you look at the total, the combined total for 4 buildings, it was about $5 million. So if you look at what's being spent on that 1144, it's mostly about environmental safety and security and some of those other things. So, and that's one of our enterprise funds. So that's a revenue generated program, among other things.
How much revenue does that you make out of it?
Mr. Dorn,
Probably a couple $100,000 a year.
a couple $100,000 a year.
All right, a couple $100,000 a year. And how much does it cost to maintain that building?
Well, when I say a couple $100,000 a year, that's profit after paying for the maintenance cost. I don't have that data at my fingertips, but of course it's in the audit, so we can get that for you.
And obviously, there's other people in that building,
Yes.
and stuff like that, right? So you're going to pave the whole parking lot for $700,000 or $600,000.
Right.
But you have a playground that you're going to pay $100,000 for 200 kids that aren't even staying there a whole day. Most of the time, they don't ever get to go to the playground. I had a daughter with special needs who was actually there. They said they were going to do a playground years ago. There's really no room for it, but let's say there was no time for it. For a child in there that's for early learning, the playground time is not really there. So spending $100,000 there, to me, sounds astronomical. And to pay $600,000, over $500,000 to pay that for very few students. And I see it says there's 84 staff there. Now, 84 staff is certainly not for the children. So obviously we're jumping up the numbers to make it sound like there's more going on in this building. I wouldn't even have thought there was 11 rooms there. Well, let's say there is 11 classrooms. You're spending over $1.2 million for this building alone. This is one of the things that we have to cut. I know that we have at 1144, they have a restaurant, right? That's never ever made any money, right? It's always losing money. And that was one of Ritaco's girlfriends that was running it. But that's besides the point. I just think that this is outrageous. Now, another thing that I find pretty outrageous is the bubble. Now, what's funny is there is no cost on this bubble at all. No cost on how much the air conditioning would cost to put in, or the bathrooms, or whatever. I think, personally, the bubble should be demolished. It's a waste of money. How much money do we make from having the bubble?
Well, first of all, I don't know if Mr. Healy wanted to address some of the concerns about 1144 in terms of the playground, in terms of the special needs population, and how this playground is going to be designed.
Well, I'm not really. You know, I just state the fact I don't really expect you to be able to answer that because.
Oh, no, we can answer it.
Well, I don't want to answer that. I want to get to the other things while I have the chance. I want to know.
Okay, so you stated an opinion, it's not really a question.
Okay, well, you can address it afterward, but this question is, you know, we're comparing apples with golden grapefruits is what I'm thinking. But, I want to know how much is it going to cost to put air conditioning in this big giant bubble, and how much revenue are we getting from this?
Yeah, I think the number is 400,000. We have a slide. I know it's on the online. I don't think it's included with the regional presentations. Actually, if we have the remote, we could go right back to it. It was in there, but let us show you where that is.
It's combined in the overall.
And how, after we put this air conditioning in, how much is it going to cost to fill up this whole giant room for air conditioning in the middle of the summer?
Yeah, for the bubbles, it was 400,000 to put air conditioning in the bubble.
Okay, and how much would it be to maintain the temperature in that building? In that bubble that's not insulated?
I mean, from an energy usage?
Sure.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Outrageous amount, I would imagine.
I can tell you that right now, and I'm sure Mr. Doran can go into the finances more, but the issue with the bubble is it's a seasonal use right now. Winter, a little bit in the spring, the end of fall, but I've been in the bubble in October, and it's like walking into a sauna. The second the sun comes up, it heats up very quickly. There's no air conditioning. There's only 2 doors, so there's very little air circulation in there. If you put air conditioning in it, that becomes a year-round facility.
That's true. And so you're saying in October it's getting outrageously hot. So what do you think is going to happen in the summertime when it's July? How much do you think it's going to cost to air condition an outrageously hot building in October and July?
I gotta take your mic, and I'll come back to you later.
Sure. I would like to get that information, how much it's going to cost for electricity for that building.
But, we want all our buildings to be 12-month facilities, not 8 months.
Well, then would you be going off? Because wait so
It's,
much.
well, you have to remember, it's used for our intermediate East Phys Ed classes,
It's a waste of money.
and it also generates revenue,
It doesn't.
and we're looking,
Show me the
well,
revenue, how much it costs to put in $400,000 air conditioning unit and then maintain it.
and then we're also in the process, as we've done with the RWJ Barnabas, we're in the process of securing corporate sponsorship, naming rights on that building. That building, over 11 million cars a year drive that by. We have a traffic study. 11 million, that's a highly desirable advertising space, and we believe we can generate even additional funds.
I have good
So,
advertising for it. That's
all right, anybody else?
Actually, Mr. Healy, before you go past that,
Yeah.
on the schedules, I do have, within our audit, we do have a separate section for our enterprise funds. So you can see how they perform and how much they make each year. And it looks like the bubble this last year, even after having some costs incurred, the profit was around $50,000. And that's before getting to the point of having naming rights assigned to that bubble, as well as having the ability to rent that for longer periods of time throughout the year. So in addition to the servicing of students that it does every day, the servicing of track teams for all of our schools that it does through points of the year, particularly the cold months, it's in a situation where it is profitable.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Scott Cadigan. I'm with Tom's River. I read through a lot of your reports here, and it's a lot of money. There's no doubt that everyone's going to have to chip in if it passes or doesn't pass, because there's numbers on here at 47, we'll call $48 million. That is about $2.1 million every year we're going to have to cover over 20 years, roughly. Somewhere we got to make these repairs. So I mean, I'm not going to be popular in the room for saying that $147 million is a lot of money, but, you know, in my estimation, you're probably going to need more than that. And, I mean, it's not going to happen here, but you probably need closer to $300 million. And if you look at the breakdown of 23 schools right now at $147 million, it's about, I don't know, an average of about $6.4 million a school. That's without reimbursements from the, what is it, ETIP or ESIP. So at $20 a person at $294 million, it's a lot of money, but, you know, really, if you're not going to come up with items that show us an offset to everyone who's a taxpayer, it would be really nice to know that the local politicians at our planning board or our councils would show perhaps the public the number of new units that might be built in the townships over the 4 different townships, so that we could get an idea of you know, if there's about a $250,000 assessment on all those new units, that would give us an idea of how much is going to come out of those new units, which is probably going to be roughly about, what are we looking at, tops, almost $11. So we need 588 new units somewhere across the way. So if we can come up with 1,000, we're looking at, we need $294 million. It's really nothing. It's not a lot of money, but it would be really nice if the politicians would just give us some local charts like that to just show us some of the offsets and see if maybe people would be able to buy into the dollar amounts. Because either way, these repairs have to be done. I mean, it's pretty evident that with some of these, and you don't want to tap into emergency funds. So I'll just leave it at this. If the gentleman up there would like to respond, or the superintendent, you know, how much have you dipped into the reserves already? And I assume, how much have you already put in to replace those, pulling from those reserves?
Well, I can answer that question by saying and I don't have a total off the top of my head, but it's many, many millions of dollars. And the other unfortunate thing that has happened in our district is that we've had to use maintenance reserve funds to offset losses of other revenue. Notably, after Superstorm Sandy, we had some CDBG grant funds for 3 years, and the 4th year was approved by the Department of Education but was denied by HUD. So we had to fill in part of that hole with maintenance reserve funds, which is not the intent of maintenance reserve funds. They're not meant to be a revenue funding source. They're meant to be to pay for all of these things. But in terms of how much, it's been many, many millions of dollars. And if you look at the audits each year, it'll show that.
I'd like to add one more thing. I don't know if everybody's thinking about this, but this is first and foremost for our children and our teachers. They deserve this. They deserve a safe learning environment. Something else we have to consider. It's secondary, but it's something we should consider. I came to Toms River in 1973. We had good schools. That's what attracted me here. Our schools are crumbling. There's no getting away from it. You can say it's a parking lot, you can say it's this. They are crumbling. What we don't do today, what we do tomorrow is going to cost more tomorrow. There's no doubt about it. If we don't address the parking lot, we're gonna get heaves, we're gonna lose the substructure, it gets more costly. If our schools crumble, who's going to want to live in Toms River? Our homes are our biggest investment we have. What's gonna happen? It's just another thought.
In direct response about building permits and what's coming, we have done 2, I believe, demographic studies over the last 4 years. I know there was one when I was in, where that information is given to the school district so that we can project new students who are coming in and also project what tax revenue would come in from those things. And that is done in conjunction with the local towns, the municipalities. But it was mentioned, and we have to remember, and I know we all like to forget it because Superstorm Sandy was 5 years ago, and so yesterday, Tom's River alone lost $2 billion worth of tax revenues. $2 billion. And they've come back. They've come back. But we're still about $600 million short of where we were when that storm hit us. And that's the Tom's River story, really. And that's the reality. So we're still coming back, and those demographic studies are being done. They're being done in conjunction with the local municipalities about building permits and what's going on in the future. So that is being looked at, and that information is being shared to inform. By the way, oh, go ahead.
That's okay.
No. By the way, one other thing on Superstorm Sandy. When people were put out of their homes, where did they go to? The schools put them up. There were shelters. So it's not just about the clip. It is about our community and how we interconnect with one another. And I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
I'm going to interrupt, Mr. Quinn, but I want to add to that. When we had this recent fire in the senior building here, not only did we use our buses, but we used this building right here to house and shelter our senior community and work with the American Red Cross and other rescues, our first responders. So our buildings are a shelter and shared with the community.
I'm Melinda Cesaro from Pine Beach School. I live in Beechwood. Sorry, that's so loud. My question, and thinking of this, yes, a lot of people, their questions and concerns are with the budget, the costs, the taxes. I'm thinking of it more from my children's perspective. I've grown up in the area. I've seen how massively we've grown and the need for additional schools because we're growing faster than the communities can keep up with, it seems. And my concern more or less is if all of this is approved, what's the anticipated timeline of when these projects are going to be from start to when are they going to be completed? When are the schools going to start to benefit from all of these enhancements?
Well, the two parts. First, to start benefit would be as early timeline this fall. We want to get projects going right away. A lot of them are their priority projects we know we need to hit. So we need to get the bid documents together, get those on the street. We would start this fall. We anticipate taking about 5 years to complete all the projects, the full $147 million worth of projects.
And are all the schools going to be worked on at the same time since there's different groups, or are they going to select one school that prioritizes another?
No, multiple schools will be worked on at the same time. There's 18 schools. All 18 schools will not have work going on at the same time. There may be maybe a couple summers where we get very close to that. Obviously, we want to schedule stuff out and arrange stuff so we do as much work over the summers when the schools are the least used. But as Superintendent Healy said, there's events going out at these schools almost 365 days a year. We're going to have to work around those. Like I said, work for holiday times, push to do as much as we can during the summer. But we expect everything to be done in about 5 years.
So, Mr. Galante, you're going to be the last, I think. We're getting, unless somebody's desperate to ask a question. But that email address, you ask me a question first thing tomorrow, we'll get a response for you. You can think about it, you can research it, and then send us a question, and then we'll get right back to you if you go on our email address. And I'll let you go, Mr. Galante, as promised.
Thank you. I appreciate the question of air conditioning in the bubble. I cannot understand why. I can't imagine turning the ventilation system off in there in the middle of August and what the temperature might reach. It's got to get up to 140 degrees. I mean, I'm well versed on greenhouse use, and I can't imagine the cost. And I can't understand why that hasn't been considered.
Before everybody leaves, I just want to thank you for coming out. I appreciate you. coming out. Thank you very much as you leave.
Okay, the tax calculator for the town has been presented, and projected costs in the referendum, the tax increase for each town. What's going to be the projected increase in the cost? I believe is it S2, an additional increase over and above the amount of this referendum. That the fact that 2% of your budget already equals what? Of course, divided by your assessment and the tax levy. And then we have the $5 million loss in state aid. Now, I understand you're using surplus to help offset that. But what's going to happen with that, let's say next year? What could be a projected cost on the tax of the, in the increase of taxes here in this town?
I can probably answer that, but
okay.
I just want to answer that because I don't want you to throw out 10 questions and I forget the first one.
Okay.
But currently, remember the law is 2% of your property tax levy, not your whole budget. So our tax levy is about $155 million for the general fund. So in ballpark terms, you're going to have a $3 million increase at 2%. And under S2, we are required to increase the tax levy 2% for the next 6 years, because according to the state of New Jersey, Toms River doesn't pay enough tax.
So the projected tax increase possibly without the use of surplus and with that 2% and with the cost of this referendum on the median income home, let's say in Toms River, can at even a later time, could you do the math for me and tell me what you think the taxes would be?
Well, it would have to be at a later time based on a couple of things. First of all, when finalizing the 2019-20 budget, we have to see how the other revenue sources interplay with what the final numbers are. But then the other thing to keep in mind is we do not know at this point what the rateable base change has been. So that offsets some of the impact as well. So you could go up $3 million, but if enough ratables came back on the rolls, that may mitigate some of the impact of those things.
As Mr. Corby stated, the $600 million seems to be the ever amount of rateable base that we're still deficient. I've heard this same number used a year ago. You mean to tell me none of the rateable base is returned? Is there has anybody done any investigation from the county tax board exactly what has been returned in the rateable base?
Mr. Galante, what I would say in response to that is I don't want to speak for the township. I know that they continue to get towards the point of getting everything back on the rolls. And when we get the rateable base figures for 2019, we'll see if there was an additional increase that maybe chops away at that 600 million. It would be good if that wasn't.
Today alone, in Ocean County, the sheriff's sale had 348 homes that went out for auction. Today only, for 1 week, with the tax increases, I think that this referendum is excessive, and I'm going to vote no. Okay? I think you need to go back, you need to sharpen your pencil, and go with more priority one, and then maybe come back to the taxpayers later. This town is the 7th largest default mortgage rate problem in the state of New Jersey. And New Jersey has the largest default rate in the country. So I don't know how people are going to afford it. I appreciate your vision. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I think it's excessive, and I'm just trying to present a different perspective. Now, this should have been held in November. I'm very disappointed that it wasn't, and I've made this statement before at school board. This is an additional $100,000 to conduct this. I also, I almost fell down when I saw your agenda for tomorrow night's meeting. Are you actually, did I read this right? You're going to hold a resolution that if this referendum fails, you're going to hold another one on March 12th, going against the will of the voters and taxpayers? Please explain this to me. I'm flabbergasted on this one.
There is a meeting
morning.
Yes.
Indeed, if this were to fail, this is called Plan B, everybody, if it were to go down, we do have to plan to resubmit and then let the Department of Education decide the critical nature of these projects.
Has any board members come forward? I'm sorry I don't make your committee meetings and such. Has there been anything off of the needs in the assessment report that have been discussed and removed?
Yes.
And nobody on the Board of Education or administration, and I didn't get my question answered, $52,000 to power wash a bus garage.
I think it's
Please.
the power board.
I mean, that was in the FCA, and that is not part of the referendum.
It's not? It's
No.
okay. Okay. I didn't get a chance to read it, so yeah, please.
So you talked about sharpening a pencil, and I think Mr. Jordan had mentioned it. We've spent the better part of 4 years on this. Our pensions, we originally started with a number of projects, and we did eliminate or reduce priority 4 and 5 projects and focused on priority 1 and 2 projects. So a lot of time has gone into this. We met at one time 3 days straight, all day, to refine those projects based on community feedback, teacher feedback, parent feedback, the questions that were sent. He moved it, but to that question site. So I can tell you unequivocally that this project, this list of projects have been pared down to every detail, every single one of them based on community feedback.
There is the detail of the transportation part of the referendum. Paving from bus traffic.
That's it. So you're
I'm going from your facilities assessment report.
now you got to remember that was done 2 years ago. We've had more.
Right, that was the assessment,
That was the
Mr.
assessment.
Galante, that spoke to all of the different needs that are out there. That's not necessarily what's in the referendum. It's been pared down and refined since then.
There have been a number of things that have been eliminated, reduced, and we focused on items that were priority 1 and 2 projects. By the way, they're now, that's 2 years ago, and we've addressed some of them. But I can tell you, having been in the meetings and in the rooms, we're talking about hundreds of hours. A lot of time went into paring that and refining that list, the original list, because you have to remember when the engineers go through a building, they're looking at it as engineers, not as educators and not necessarily as someone familiar with the district. And then what we do is we meet with them and then we refine that list based on the institutional knowledge of the district and then based on the feedback of the community and teachers. And I can tell you that that list not only was refined, but we were able to add things that weren't even in the original list based on the community feedback, which we're proud of because the community came out and said, well, we really need these things. And we said, let's see how we can make them work. And we did. One of the things was the playgrounds. You have 12 elementary schools and there's a disparity in our condition of our playgrounds. And the PTO should be responsible for paying for new playgrounds. You just can't do that anymore. And if you live on that side of town and you can raise money, and that side of town you can't, shouldn't mean the difference between a child having a playground. So a lot of thought went into this in discussion with this board. I can tell you that for sure.
On behalf of one more, please.
You know, job in the administration and job in Board of Education is, of course, the vision is to protect the students, but it also is to protect the taxpayers. That is as equally important as taking care of the children. Now, with the foreclosure rate in this town and seeing the problems that are here and seeing that I believe a good education exists in the condition that it is now, that, the money to be able to, I don't think building buildings, I don't think that educates the children. I think it's done with it. And I think that from the state to give us the money, $43 million, and then deny us the state aid that we need for the overall education, not only the capital portion, but educating the children, I think it's an insult. But again, I think that, I'm just gonna vote no. Thank you.
Thank
And
you for your opinion, and that's why we have elections.
Yeah, and I can't believe that you're gonna rerun this election.
Well,
The horse lost, and you're gonna let the horse out of the gate again. Thank you.
Kind of discussion. Thank you all for coming.
I have one question to the engineer. I just want to ask this question. The intermediate south is only a building that's only 13 years old, and yet the facade for restoration is $250,000. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, this is, you've had some rough weather here since 2005. A building is meant to withstand something, but eventually, especially if we're doing this, let's do it right. We know there's repointing issues, we know there's roof repair, and we're gonna be in a building doing work. Let's get that done too. Water intrusion is just gonna make it get worse. What's $250,000 now? 5-10 years from now, it can be $1 million or more. So we're here doing this work. Let's get as much done as we can. And building up roof is very important because, again, that's where the water gets in and the problems just get worse and worse. Very quickly.
Thank you again, everybody. And I know Mr. Secure, go to that. Anyway, if you go on our trschools.com webpage, right front and center, just click on that referendum information, and there's a ton of information, and you can ask questions.
Now you know what I gotta deal with.
Thank you again.
Maybe we should get rid of that bulb